Hello, 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 and welcome to Two Black Church Boys Churched in Change. Hello, my name is Calvin Bell, and I'm here with my co-host William. How are you doing today, William?
I am hot, bro. I am burning up. Oh my goodness, man. It has been a hot one today.
I feel you on that.
And at the outset, please forgive us for starting a little bit later than usual. What happened was your boy over here is having some serious problems with his Xfinity internet connection. I think it's because of the storms that we've been having the last few days. But we've been having issues all day long. And so if we have issues tonight, I'm apologizing in advance. They will all be on me, most likely tonight. But with that being said, we want to begin tonight's talk with a question that we received from someone, which will kind of springboard us into tonight's conversation. And the question that we received was specifically, what has the Greater New Jersey Conference of the United Methodist Church done for Black churches, our community in general, as a result of George Floyd's killing? And the response that I have to that question is, first and foremost, that they've, sent out communication to the member churches. They've expressed their support and solidarity with what we're doing. But beyond that, they haven't done much, if we're being completely transparent and honest about it. And so that kind of springboards us to what we're talking about tonight. Is it just enough to stand in solidarity? Is it just enough to peacefully protest using principles of nonviolence? Or does violent protest, and in this context, we're defining violent protest specifically as the damage to property, not the damage to other human life, because of course we as Christians don't endorse that. But what role does violent damage to other property play in protest around social resistance? So the way Calvin and I decided to format this is we want this first and foremost to be interactive. So of course, as we're talking tonight, please send in your questions and your comments. But Calvin and I have a slight disagreement on this. And so the way we framed this is that Calvin's going to explain his position first, then I'm going to explain my position, and then afterwards, we're going to engage in some dialogue. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to my co-host, my brother Calvin.
And I just want to clarify before I say my points that we agree that there is a need for protest during this time. We are for the movement of Black Lives Matter, and we truly are, like we've stated last time, sick and tired of being sick and tired. So that is not what we're arguing at all, but like William said, just the use of violence in terms of destroying property during this time. So my position on it is, and I went to a protest a couple of days ago, and it was peaceful and it went very well. My position and my viewpoint or lookout on it is that in order to make true change, in order to ensure that we are doing something that is truly effective, then we must be peaceful and in a sense that we are voicing our opinions so that we are heard, but without it becoming chaotic. And now I do understand that, and I have seen that a lot of what has caused this form of violence towards property has been incited by. Hello, everyone. We want to apologize for what happened. We were disconnected from Facebook. We have no control over that. This was through Zoom, the platform that we're using as of right now, in hopes that we can progress to other platforms and really mobilize our voices in other ways. But like we said, we cannot control the technical difficulties that we've had over the past couple of days. As you may know, a lot of people have been in quarantine as of right now. So the use of Comcast and other networks has really been what everyone is using at one point in time. But we're glad to be back on in hopes that we can just get back our viewers and stay engaged into the conversation. But what I was stating before I was disconnected was my viewpoint on the use of looting or violent protests in terms of towards property, and not towards others, but towards property during this point in time. So, like I was saying, I went to a protest a couple of days ago, and it was very peaceful when I attended and went. However, I saw on the news at times that people were leaving certain stores with boxes of sneakers and everything like that. And I think that when it gets to an extent of destroying other people's property, things that businesses people have worked for, when we maybe don't even need to, I think that is where it gets to an extent that really leaves what the protest is for, which is for George Floyd, but not only George Floyd, but also Black Lives Matter, for the killings of other Black men and women over the past years and decades that we've witnessed. I am so happy that people are mobilizing their voices right now. However, I think that sometimes there are certain people that are taking advantage of the protests and not doing it effectively. However, I do understand that people are angry, and when anger arises and comes up, then there goes to specific extents of looting and destroying property and different things like that. However, I think that at the same time, there needs to be a form of slight order where people are at least allowing the protests to continue without having it to be on the news because of the looting specifically, and not because of the protest itself that was peaceful in the beginning.
Thank you, Calvin. I'm going to take a slightly different bent. On my Facebook Live a few days ago, I expressed a lot of what I'm going to express again here. So if you heard that, forgive me, it's going to be redundant. But I come to this moment and my opinions about the role of violence and social resistance, having been engaged in social resistance for 9 years. I started out in 2011 organizing around Troy Davis's case. For those who don't know, Troy Davis was accused in 1989 of murdering a white police officer in a suburb of Atlanta. And we protested peacefully, but nothing happened. He was still executed despite mountains of evidence saying that he was innocent. In 2012, as many of us know, Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman walking to his father's house. I organized and worked with the NAACP at Morehouse around protests to Trayvon Martin's death. But what happened in 2013, sure enough, George Zimmerman was acquitted. I worked for 2 years in community organizing around healthcare equity, around violence prevention in Camden, around developing holistic solutions to trauma and poverty-induced issues. Was it successful? In some ways, yes, it was successful. But in a lot of ways, we really didn't move the needle effectively. But in all, because we're faith-based, we still engaged in nonviolent, peaceful protests and resistance. In 2014, enter Mike Brown and the Ferguson uprisings. I worked in law school while I was a first year at Penn to organize protests that were peaceful in nature around the Mike Brown issue. But still, the cop who killed Mike Brown, Darren Wilson, wasn't even indicted, let alone stood trial. Then enter Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Jefferson, Sandra Bland, and a host of others. And countless times over and over and over again, we've engaged in nonviolent, peaceful protests and resistance. And what has happened? Either officers weren't charged, they weren't indicted, or if they were indicted and charged, they were ultimately acquitted or found not guilty. So my question becomes, at what point in time do we go from these nonviolent protests, which have not resulted in charges, which have not resulted in convictions, which have not resulted in police officers being and others being guilty for the killings of our Black brothers and sisters, to a form of resistance that works? And I'm convinced at this point that violent protest has to, at some form or fashion, be on the table. Look what has happened since we've engaged in more violent forms of protest. Before we engaged in that, none of these officers were charged at all in the killing of our brother George Floyd. But now, not only has the charge for the main officer who had his knee on his neck been upgraded from third-degree murder to second-degree murder, but now all 4 officers involved in that killing have been charged. You cannot tell me that that is not the result of violent protest. You cannot tell me that that doesn't come from the role about brings awareness to an issue. But the issue that I have is that we're already aware of that. We as a nation, sisters being killed and slaughtered by police officers for just being Black, for just living their lives. But it hasn't worked. It hasn't done anything. So now what violent protest does is it brings an urgency to the matter. It brings a immediacy to it, that if you do not change, if you do not respond to the cries of these Black bodies because of the Black blood that is spilling in the streets of this country unjustly, then we're going to tear this down. We're going to burn this down. So therefore, our only recourse at this point is violence. Our only recourse is to engage in these acts of protest now. And they're working. Because what they're doing is what nonviolent protests weren't doing. So for me, although I may not personally always engage in violent forms of protest, I definitely agree with their usage. And I see why people are using it. Martin Luther King Jr. himself said that rioting is the language of those who are unheard. And I think that now we are determined through any means necessary to make our voices heard.
Yeah, I understand that. What do you say to a person who maybe they built their business from the ground up and they don't align themselves with the police officers, but they align themselves with the movement going on right now, but their shop was raided? What do you then say to them?
That's one of the toughest parts of wrestling with the use of violence in this capacity. I hate to say it like this, and this is going to sound tragic because I come from a family of entrepreneurs and small business owners, but we're in the fight for our lives as a people. Things are getting worse every day. And the unfortunate reality of this is that when you're engaging in any type of protest, violent or nonviolent, there's going to be some collateral damage. And sometimes some of these businesses are that collateral damage for the greater good of society. I know that's not the PC answer, or that's not the answer that we want to embrace, but that kind of becomes our reality. I hate to say it like that. I mean, my grandmother owned a restaurant in Camden from 1955 all the way until she passed away in 2000. And I would hate to have seen her business looted. But I think also that my grandmother also was socially conscious. And I think that for the greater good, sometimes things have to happen in order for us to achieve real meaningful progress and change.
Yeah.
My question.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, William.
My question for you is, if we haven't seen the urgency and the immediacy of using nonviolent protests in times past, what makes you think that now nonviolent protest is going to work in this instance?
So, what I've seen is that the encounters have been very violent, which is why we also want to make sure that we echo there are other forms of protests. And this could go into another spiraling, but there are other forms of protest if you decide not to go out during this COVID-19 pandemic, such as donating so that people who are protesting, putting themselves on the lines, can have lawyers if they're arrested and different things like that. Just to take that as a side note. What I've seen is chaos in front of me, and I am for the progression of it in terms of making sure that we are standing our ground. But I get very tired of seeing police officers being on like protesters during this time. And then also I get tired when I was watching the news, and then I was like seeing like people walking out with like 3 pairs of sneakers from a store. And I'm like, what does that have to do with the protest itself? Where is the meaningful? Where are we? Why is that so meaningful that you are stealing from a store instead of doing what we should be doing, which is protesting? Now, I can understand if you were peaceful at that point in time, and then someone engaged and started beating you up, and then that's when it's like, okay, I'm being peaceful. I was doing the things that I was supposed to be doing, but now you are engaging by trying to fight me without me doing anything. I'm standing still. However, I think that when it goes to a place, and when I see it on the news as well, where people are using the looting and everything to say why the Black Lives Matter movement is not validated or should not be validated, or this is what happens when people involve themselves in it. When the Black Lives Matter movement is not the ones that are getting involved in that. At times, there are people such as white anarchists who have been engaging in this destruction of property, and have been inciting it first. And other times it's just people who are like, oh wow, they're taking shoes. Oh, let me get involved in it. But the Black Lives Matter movement is not associated with this type of protesting in terms of destroying property and everything like that. Now, there might be people who say I align myself with the Black Lives Matter movement, but then I get sick and tired of the people in the news trying to reconstruct it or use that as a way of saying this is not a valid movement when it is a valid movement and should be progressed during this time. Now, you bring up a good point. Like when you have the civil rights movement and everything like that, did we really accomplish true change? And I think I feel like a lot of people use MLK's rhetoric as a way of saying, oh, we need to be not protest. We need to link arms in arms instead of trying to change for the Black community specifically. And I also get tired of that as well. We cannot try to divide MLK and Malcolm X and all these other figures from each other because we think, oh, well, you align yourself more with an MLK. So that's instantly what I'm going to use as rhetoric to defend why we should be like the way in which we should protest and the way in which we should go about things. We need to be nonviolent, blah, blah, blah. I think that sometimes we get, and not we as in me and you, but people who are not aware of the history of Black leaders and the change that they've made, how they use their ideology as a defense mechanism to make a point. And that is something that I'm not for. When we're saying MLK is about this specifically and Malcolm X was about this specifically, and there's no parallel through their points, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure if you answered my question. I'm going to reframe it, but I'm going to respond to everything that you said. But yeah. I want to say at the outset that what I'm afraid of, I'm not sure if you're doing this, but a lot of your responses, in my opinion, cloaked in respectability. You're talking about what our image is going to be to the news media, what our image is going to be to society. I'm not concerned about that. I am concerned about liberation. I'm concerned about the fact that for 400 years, our experience in this country has been one of subjugation, oppression, disinterest, disinvestment, pillaging, and any other form of oppression that you can think of, right? Any other adjective that you can use to define that. So for me, when you've been under a yoke for 400 years, I don't know how you can expect people who have been under that yoke to continuously not respond violently. to continuously respond in peaceful measures. I think at some point in time, you cannot expect a people who've been beaten down, you enslave them. And then when you quote unquote free them, you free them into a society where they were castigated as second-class citizens, where they continue to be second-class citizens, whether it's through de facto segregation or de jure segregation, whether it's through the legal system, through the economic system, or through whatever system we have it in this country. For 400 plus years, we've been castigated as second-class people, right? And so now you're still trying to police our protests. You're still trying to tell us how we can express our anger, how we can express our voice, how we can express ourselves. And for me, I have an issue with that. I have an issue when you're more concerned, not you, Calvin.
Yeah, I know.
People are more concerned about property loss than they are concerned about this man having his knee on George Floyd's neck, about Breonna Taylor's murderer still being on the loose after shooting 22 rounds into this young lady's house, after arresting her boyfriend for the crime when it wasn't even her boyfriend. It was police officers. When a man who was barbecuing and serving food to people during the protests in Louisville, Kentucky, was murdered. When two of my Spelman and Morehouse brothers and sisters were tased and dragged from their cars. So for me, I don't care about property loss when we're talking about the loss of life, when we're talking about the deprivation of freedom of Black people. For me, it's more important and more essential that we're fighting and that our voices are heard. And if property has to be destroyed in the process, then property has to be destroyed in the process. To the points that you're making, one, I wanted to kind of respond to this when you made the point that you had made about the small businesses. Yeah. The bulk of businesses that are being, I guess, quote unquote, looted are larger corporations and companies, right? We're talking about Target, we're talking about the Apple Store in Center City, we're talking about Macy's. We're not talking about your average mom and pop store in that instance. Now, are there some collateral damage? Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen.
Yeah. But we're also talking about, and that's not the minority. Secondly, when you talk about Black Lives Matter not being aligned with anarchists, I agree with that in general. But one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter did endorse violent property damage as a form of protest. So I can't say in totality that Black Lives Matter isn't aligned, but Black Lives Matter also isn't a monolithic organization, right? It has different forms depending on where you are geographically. Different leadership is not centralized. So we can't speak for Black Lives Matter one way or the other. Thirdly, my point is, to your point about MLK,
yeah.
I think it feeds to the question that I was asking you.
Yeah.
We've always had a diversity of protest, right? We've always had a diversity of voice. MLK didn't exist in a vacuum by himself, neither did Malcolm X, and neither did they exist in a parallel. We always try to make this crazy parallel where it was just MLK and Malcolm. It wasn't just MLK and Malcolm. There was always Black communism. There was always other forms of Black militarism. Stokely Carmichael had his own movement going on in the midst of both the MLK and the Malcolm dynamic. SNCC wasn't always aligned with either MLK or Malcolm. So there's always, CORE wasn't always aligned with MLK and Malcolm. So it was always diverse, and there was always these diverging groups who were all advocating for the same thing. My question to you, I guess I'll rephrase it like this, and I think we're running low on time, and I'm not sure if anybody had comments, because I can't check on mine. My question to you is, when people are tired, we're good?
Yeah, we're good.
When people are tired, when people are tired and they're under the yoke of oppression, and they've tried a method that hasn't worked. They've tried peaceful. We've been trying peaceful protests since the 50s, and it hasn't, by and large, moved the needle far. I saw a little girl today, and it broke my heart. I saw this little young girl. I'm not sure if you saw the video, Calvin. This little young Black girl was out there talking about no justice, no peace, resist the police.
Yes.
And that broke my heart, because my mama was saying that back in the 60s. I'm saying that now in the 80s, I mean, in the 90s, early 2000s, and this little girl was going to say that. And if we don't do something, if something doesn't drastically change, she's going to be saying that same thing 50 years from now. And her child is going to be saying it, and her grandchild is going to be saying it. So at what point in time do we say enough is enough?
So if I make the point of, I don't think protesting is enough, and that we're living in systemic racism and a system that is already put against us. So no matter how violent the protest gets or how peaceful the protest gets, that is not going to be enough in order to change the system that we're living in. It's going to come down to legislation. It's going to come down to having Black leaders that speak on behalf, Black and white leaders that speak on behalf of our issues and doesn't just give broad statements that really kind of puts it in a bow in a box, and then it's like, yeah, okay, I put it to the side because now I know that I'm going to be guaranteed the Black vote. It doesn't only take that, it takes voting based on policy and what people are saying, and not based on the reputation that someone has had or how personable someone is, blah, blah, blah. What are they saying that really correlates to the community that you're coming from? And it's not only a national thing, because we did touch on Joe Biden, but it's also a local thing. It's, are you getting involved in your local politics in Camden? Are you getting involved in your local politics in Pensacola and everything? It's not just.
Calvin, I'm going to stop you here. I agree, but two things. One, I don't want it to become I don't want this to become a platform where we're trying to shame people into doing things. Yeah. I agree. We should be voting. Protest is just one avenue of it. There's always economic disruption. We can talk about that at another time. I want us to kind of stay on topic here with the whole idea of violence and protest. The second thing is that I don't want it to become a place where we are yelling at people about voting, right? We're yelling at people about doing X, Y, and Z. I agree. Voting is important. I agree that engaging with your legislators is important. Economic protest is important as well, and that's a form of protest that we could talk about too. But I think that what I don't want to do is I don't want to chastise Black people who don't vote, Black people who don't engage in economic protest, Black people who don't do all these. We're oppressed and traumatized people, man. So at the end of the day, what I see is there are people who have been traumatized, who have grown up in hard situations, and when enough is enough, enough is enough. I posted this on my page the other day, that poem by Langston Hughes, where it talks about Negroes being kind and mild and sweet, but the end of that line, the end of that poem was, it said Negroes sweet and mild, but beware the day they change their mind. And I think that we're entering very quickly into the days where Black people are tired of being mild, and tired of being sweet. They're tired of being kind. They're tired of being told to turn the other cheek. They're tired of being. Everything okay over there?
Yeah, and I was gonna say that in terms of whether violent protest is the best way of going about it. What I have also seen is that a lot of these occasions, a lot of this has occurred in more metropolitan cities, much bigger areas such as Philadelphia, Atlanta, and other places. However, on a local basis, such as Camden, that has really spread around different platforms, people have been seeing it. And what I think that has done, the power that has shown, is that these misconceptions about a city that was on the Wall Street top 50 when it came to being quote unquote most violent, and these stereotypes that people continuously have, not saying that it will drastically brush away all those stereotypes that people already make up in their head, but this is what my capstone project was on: community engagement in the city of Camden and its influence on the rates of violence. Not only violence, but in other circumstances. And the power and progression of what has happened in the city in terms of, I don't care if people say, oh, Camden doesn't have that many stores and everything like that. Camden has grown tremendously in terms of property and everything like that. But in terms of when you talk about how it was ran, not only were the people standing side by side with the police officers, but the police officers were standing side by side with the people. And I think that slowly gains respect. We don't want, and personally for me, it's not me saying that, oh yes, all police officers are bad, because people constantly say, oh, not all police officers are bad. That's not my case. My case is that in order to show that you care about us, in order to show that you are protecting us, then we want you to be arms in arms with us. And I saw that that was peaceful because they were arms in arms with each other, that he listened to the people and the people listened to him. And the same thing that Morristown, I was surprised how many people were even out there for something such as that, and that it didn't go left because we are in a place that is predominantly area that's populated conservatively, that has had its share of race issues, but also the encounters with the police officers are very much different. And this is something that has never happened in a place such as that. When you talk about especially property, that could have instantly went left in areas such as that. And I don't want to say, oh, because it's suburban, oh, that's the reason why it didn't go left. No, I think the fact is that something did occur at that point in time. There was someone who came over and really tried to throw off the protest, and people could have easily got angry. People could have easily attacked him, and then it could have gone left. And then that the light that was shined on the organizers who put something like that together, where we could have listened to the people who rose up and stood in front and really said something, that would have been lost. However, that didn't happen. The people stepped in and were saying, please leave. And then a politician who is very much respected in that area also asked him to leave. And then the police officer stepped in and moved the heckler as well. I think that protest was peaceful in that standpoint. Now, it's different in big metropolitan areas in big cities. Now, that is the case of where I'm asked. I kind of wonder why it gets to the point of people destroying property in bigger areas compared to maybe a place such as Morristown or Camden.
Well, so one, Calvin, you refused to answer my question. So that's fine.
I did. I thought
my question. You just kind of ducked my question. But I guess why my concern is that even your response is still cloaked in what I would call respectability. Like, I personally, I mean, it's great that police walk hand in hand with the community, right, in Camden. I think that I don't care if the police walk hand in hand with the people in Camden. What I care about is the police attacking me and not doing their job. Should the police walk hand in hand? That's nice.
But I think that is progression in that standpoint.
If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
But I think that was the case. I think that was the reason why that didn't happen. That they weren't attacked, because he was listening to what they were saying.
Your position is that it's bad. See, my position isn't that it's bad. See, that's where we have a fundamental disagreement. My position is that the violence that's happening in the metropolitan cities isn't bad. And so I don't care if it's not happening in the urban, in the smaller areas, because if it did happen, I would be okay with it happening. So I think, to answer your question, those areas are more populous. There's more room for people. I agree with you that there are infiltrators and agitators who are using this moment to further and perpetuate their own agendas, and that's not the agenda that we're using. But I think that in general, I guess our point of departure is that I don't necessarily think that property damage in a protest is bad. I don't necessarily think that use of force is bad. I think that had all the protests been like Camden and Flint, where it was peaceful and nice, I don't think it would have gotten attention. I think it would have died down. I think that you need the violence to move people. You need the violence to present a sense of urgency. The reason why I believe that things got done in the 60s was because they were ready to work with King, because there was the threat of violence from the other different movements. Without that threat of violence, things in America will never change. America was literally founded on violence. America,
the revolution,
has achieved everything that is achieved because of violence. The only things that America understands, and we talk about this offline, are violence and threats to capitalism. If it's not violent, and if it does not fundamentally and massively threaten the capitalistic regime of this country, nothing is going to happen. Those 4 officers would not have been charged if everybody around the country was kumbaya-ing it with the cops. It just wouldn't have happened. You needed the disruptions and the disturbances that violence, that those looting has caused in order for Keith Ellison in Minnesota to act with a sense of urgency. There's legislation now in different cities around the use of police force, around detainment measures, around last options, around shooting in the leg versus shooting to kill, because of the violence, because of the property damage. Had those things never happened, nothing would change. In Kansas City, we don't talk about this, but since the Metropolitan Cop Force has come into being in 2012, the amount of excessive force claims has risen 120-something% in this community. We don't talk about that, but them walking hand in hand and singing and all of that, that's nice, but it doesn't change the fact that these white cops are coming into our Black community, not understanding our people and beating them, bashing their heads in when there aren't no cameras around. So, in Flint, Michigan, they're singing, but they still don't got clean drinking water. So right. For me, I don't care about police officers being nice. It ain't changing nothing. At this point, like, it's not changing anything. So if you got to burn down some buildings to bring about some fundamental change so that my children, so that your children don't have to go through what we're going through right now, then burn the buildings down. I hate this. I know this is a Christian platform. We love Jesus, but burn down. I'm not saying hurt people. I'm not saying attack people. I would never endorse violence in that capacity. But what I'm saying is a way to bring about an urgent change. And if property damage brings about that urgent change, I'm for that. Jesus destroyed the temple. That if Jesus would have walked into that temple and they were selling that merchandise all nice and, oh, y'all just stop doing that. Oh, please, please, please. Nothing would have happened. But Jesus had to drive the money changers out of the temple, and he drove them out by a force of violence.
So, William, I have a question then. So, were you not upset when there were undercover police officers hitting glass and everything like that to play into the fact that people were destroying buildings and everything like that to show, oh, this is what people are doing to really set it up in that fact and way?
Probably you're still that's
I'm asking. I'm not. No, it's not respectability on that fact. But I'm asking, or do you not are you not angry in that retrospect that they are undercover and destroying it along with you, so that it plays into the fact that, oh yeah, this is what they're doing? Because then that looks bad on the police officers. That's what I'm asking. That looks bad on the police officers. I'm not being respectable.
Your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
But your question, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I'm saying when people ask that type of question, they're asking it to drive home a narrative about respectability. So I'm attacking the narrative, not attacking you. I love you. Me and you, I love you. But the narrative that question is steeped in is this narrative that we have to present ourselves a certain type of way so that we can be received by the majority community. And that's the narrative that I think has to be dismantled. To answer your question, I do not like the idea of police officers or other agitators blending themselves into the movement to take away the narrative from what we're trying to do. No, I don't like that. However, like I said, the change is not going to occur. Change is not going to come until you radically disturb and disrupt the existing patterns. And peaceful, nonviolent resistance hasn't been able to effectively disturb the patterns. People have been saying, oh, that's nice. They're marching together. They're kumbaya. They're singing together. They're doing walk together. Children, don't you get weird. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. But there's no disruption of patterns in that. So I get what you're saying. Yes, there's infiltrators. Yes, there's agitators. Yes, there's white anarchists. No, I don't agree with any of that. Would I like to see change happen without property damage? Yes, I would. But at this point in time, it ain't happened. So my question to you again is, what do you do if the patterns that we've been using and employing haven't been working? That's why I started this off 9 years, and I've been doing it. It's not working. What do you do?
Right. So, I think so this is a personal thing. I think that I come from a place of trying to mobilize in different ways, and I look at, and maybe you might say that it's a little bit different, but I look at the way in which the youth have really been trying to make changes in terms of policy and doing things on in their local communities, because I've seen this in a lot of the engagements I have had with people who have won the Princeton Prize in race relations with me, as well as the Yale Bassett Award. These are students who are doing things on a local level in order to ensure that policy changes are made within the community. Now, they do get involved in protesting and everything like that, but I just personally don't think that that is enough. I don't think that that is something that drastically changes the system. Systemic racism is going to happen no matter if you're peaceful or if you're violent. My perspective on it is that we need to do it in terms of changing policy and making areas more equitable for everyone. So, for example, okay, yeah, we're destroying businesses, but I personally want to ensure that we're not destroying Black businesses, for example, that we're giving money towards those businesses to build them up, because that is playing into the fact that we are building up our community. I personally, yes, we can be violent, if in your terms, yes, dismantling the system of capitalism in that way. However, I feel like if we are giving money towards those businesses that are really trying to, Black businesses that haven't had a chance to really be put on a platform that allows them to succeed, if we're giving our money now during this time, donating not only to the protesters, but donating to those companies. And Facebook, I'm a part of a group chat that is for Black businesses. And it's people saying, oh, this is my Black business, everything like that. You wouldn't know that, because now during this time, what I think protesting has allowed people to do is now look at avenues within Black politics, the Black system, Black community in different areas to say, how can we truly invest in these communities? How can we truly give our money? So this is how I think you are affected. I think, and this is my point of view, white allyship, we don't need a white savior. Yes, we don't need a white savior. However, white allyship, I told my friend, oh, this about this juice bar or whatever in Merchantville, and now they want to go. Okay, he's not Black, but he's of another race. And now what does that do? That tells him to go tell the next person and tell the next person and tell the next person, until we build up this community to say that this, we're trying to put this community, this business and success, it's a Black community, Black owned. Start doing that in a way in which it tries to mobilize the system. I am never going to judge someone if they can't go out to protest or go out and be involved in violent or nonviolent protests because of the times that we're living in with this coronavirus and everything like that. But if they choose other avenues, such as giving their money towards something that benefits my community, then that shows me that we are slowly changing the system. And maybe I'm a short optimist in different ways. However, I think that we need to make sure that we're never going to get out of this system of capitalism. Some people may believe it or not, but it's making it even worse now. I think that now, use your money. How about you use your money and give to businesses that are really trying to give to our community? How about you use your voice to help change the curriculums in Black schools so that it benefits them? How about you go to private institutions and say, let's change the history curriculums and let's change the other subjects so that it's more equitable for people, Black students, to feel more accepted in certain avenues? How about you talk to alumni at different communities and say, how about now let's mobilize here? Mikey, there's a basketball player named Mikey. He made a statement and it changed a lot for people. And if he makes this move, it will change a lot for people too. He's saying that he wants to play basketball at an HBCU. Even making that statement gives people possibility. He is ranked #1 in the ESPN Top 100. Think about that. Think about how that would change the momentum of Black education if he was to go there. It's not that I didn't want to go to HBCU. I just wasn't given the funds. But say that move happens, then students like myself who wanted to go to an HBCU would then be able to go because scholarships and money would be given to them. They wouldn't have, HBCUs wouldn't have to worry about that being an issue during this coronavirus, like some of these private institutions that are only worried about when they can start back up due to policy. I think that there are other ways besides what we're doing. And that is how you dismantle the system slowly. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you slowly chop it down and put our community on the same playing field as the other communities, even a little bit, then that becomes more equitable. So even in that case, I don't think, and I made this statement on Instagram, I don't think protesting is enough. Even past the nonviolence.
Calvin, we're not arguing whether or not protesting is enough. That's not the question I asked you. We're not arguing whether or not protesting is enough.
So you said, what else can we do? What else can we do? And I was giving you other ways that we can do.
I said, this is what I said. I said, when we're done, when nonviolent protesting isn't enough, where do we go? And you answered that question by saying we move beyond protesting. That's your answer. That we move beyond protesting.
That is my opinion. No, yes.
That's your opinion, and I don't disagree with your opinion. And you outline some things, and I agree with all of them. And this show is going to deal with all of those things that you just outlined, because you just gave us a great springboard into what we're going to be talking about in the weeks ahead. But I think that coupled with those things, you still need agitation to present an urgency to the plans that you presented, right? That's all I'm arguing. And nonviolent protest doesn't produce the urgency for change that violent protest does. Politicians aren't going to just magically move if they don't feel an urgent need to move. You're not going to change anything unless there's an urgent need to bring about radical change. And for me, that's what the violent protest does. It makes the machinations possible so that we can do the things that you just lifted up. I'm an advocate of supporting Black-owned businesses. You know that. I'm an advocate of supporting HBCUs. You know that. I'm an advocate of investing in and developing our own communities. You know that. I'm an advocate of bringing in different economic resources for our city of Camden. You know that. One of our fundamental arguments is about the role of gentrification in Camden. And my position has always been that Camden's problem isn't gentrification. Camden's problem is economic deprivation. And if we change the economy so that it works for the people, gentrification wouldn't be an issue in our community. So I'm all about using economic vehicles to bring about change for our community. But what I'm saying is that in addition to economic change, you need political change. And the only way you move political change is if they sense the urgency to move. And the only way they're going to sense the urgency to move is that a groundswell of people, not to lean into my revolutionary roots here, a groundswell of people are going to have to make it necessary for them and uncomfortable for them to maintain the status quo. That to me is the role of protest. I don't disagree with anything that you just laid out. I think that what you just laid out is fine. And I've devoted my life work to the things that you've just laid out. Like I'm the biggest advocate for, and I happen to know, I forget the brother's name who wants to go to HBCU, but I'm a big advocate for that, as you know. I'm a big advocate for Black business ownership. I support Black-owned businesses. When we had the blackout the other day, I only supported Black-owned businesses. So, and I traditionally try as much as I can to support Black-owned businesses, to invest in Black-owned businesses, to argue and to advocate and to raise money for Black-owned businesses. I'm raising money for Morehouse College right now as we speak, and other HBCUs that are struggling through this pandemic. So I'm an advocate of doing those things. The only point that I'm trying to make is that you have to couple those things with urgency.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It is burning hot in my house.
Yeah. Oh yes, same. We're coming up to a time. Yeah,
we're coming up to a time. We appreciate you all for bearing with our technological problems tonight. We can't control what happens on Facebook's end, like Calvin said earlier. It's a lot of people using these vehicles at the same time, and so we can't argue. We can't predict what happens. So we thank you all for bearing with us and for staying tuned through that. In the weeks ahead, the things that Calvin and I outlined towards the end of this conversation are things that we're going to be talking about. And so next week, we're going to be featuring people who are working on the ground in education equity. And then weeks beyond that, we're going to be talking about voter registration, voting rights, and other issues. So we ask that you stay tuned, that as we move beyond protests into other avenues in which we can make effective change in our community, we pray that you stay with us as we continue these conversations. But until then, we're two Black church boys and we're out.
Stay church. Bye.